this Creative Jazz Weekend webinar, this is the first time Deal Music and Arts has actually ever done a webinar. We've had a trial run, it worked last week, and I'm delighted to be joined. By the way, I'm Paul Edlin, Artistic Director of Deal Music and Arts. I'm delighted to be joined by Claire Furlong, who is Head of Learning and Participation at the National Youth Jazz Orchestra of Great Britain, NYJO, as it is now known. Jo Browne, who has many hats, wonderful saxophonist, associate educator at NYJO, musical director of Deal Music and Arts' own Jazz Journey programme, and of the Creative Jazz Weekend that we have, and has been the curator of this week's online events. Jazz Kayser, who is a drummer, percussionist, a key member of the National Youth NYJO, as I should call it, and one of their ambassadors, who studied at Berkeley and Boston and is about to give a gig tonight, which we can all watch on YouTube live at 8 o'clock with the Kansas Smitties. And you've got to leave at 6:30, Jazz, to get to the rehearsal. Well,
exactly.
We can hear them rehearsing. And Dan
here in
Higham,
the background, yeah.
You can. And Dan Higham, who is the lead trombone with NYJO, one of their key ambassadors, and has been playing since the age of 8 and has a remarkable story. Jazz, you've got a short journey from your room at the moment to the neighbouring room where the performance is going to take place tonight. Tell us about your jazz journey throughout your life and how relevant the National Youth Jazz Orchestra has been to you.
Yeah, so I guess I started playing drums when I was about 9 years old at a school I went to called Warminster School. And I just remember being very desperate to learn the drums, and obviously my family were a bit reluctant because it's the loudest instrument, so they weren't too happy about that, but it all went well in the end and kept it up for quite a long time, well, until now, forever basically. But yeah, I remember doing the grades, and some of the tunes would come in and there would be jazz songs, and it just kind of like drew my ear to jazz, and I heard people like Herbie Hancock and just got really interested in that sound. So I grew up in southwest England actually, like in Dorset, near Wiltshire, Dorset, like between those.
I see.
So
and was there a NYJO presence in Dorset at the time?
No, there wasn't. I did do the Dorset Youth Jazz Orchestra actually, but then I don't think there might have been an age limit to that. So then my mum offered to take me over to NYJO because she heard about the NYJO. I think it's the Academy now, but it was called NYJO when I did it. I met Arthur on bass, who did it. I think I was like 15 or something like that.
Okay, so it's central to your life. So that brings me to Claire. As Head of Learning and Participation, the journey of NYJO, particularly in recent years, has been very different, hasn't it? Can you tell us a little bit about, particularly about the academies and what they've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, NYJO has been around for almost 60 years now, but I think it's safe to say for the first 50, it didn't really earn the national bit of its name. So we've been working really hard to change that over the last few years, and not just have an academy in London, because we had people travelling from Hull or Southampton or Dorset, it now turns out, every week to attend this, and it just seemed that we should be going there rather than expecting people to come to us. So we've now got a strong network of partnerships across England and Wales, and regional academies in Cumbria, Lancashire, Darlington and Wiltshire, which is where we are regularly delivering jazz education now.
And that means it's a huge investment, isn't it, of time and energy, because all these places are so far away, and all the organisations that you're working with, although they have a common thread, but they are quite different organisations, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. But I think what we found is, or I found in each area, there's that one person who's the jazz person in the area that's really passionate about it and delivering loads or as much as they can for young people locally. So we really see it as our role to be supporting them and championing them and joining them together to just create this progression route for young jazz musicians that exists in classical music, but it's not there in jazz currently. So that's our mission, to set it up.
Now, Joe, we've been very fortunate in Deal. You were born and bred in East Kent, and you've been part of Deal Music and Arts and been running the Jazz Journey program that we have, which we started working with NYJO. But you're now integral to the NYJO Academies, aren't you? Where else are you working apart from down in the southeast here?
So I work with the up north, basically. So with the Cumbria Academy and the Lancashire Academy. So I have been going up there kind of regularly for a weekend and doing traditionally Cumbria on the Saturday and then Lancashire on the Sunday. I'm also going to be involved with the Humberside Academy, which I've yet to meet any of the people involved with that physically yet, because it launched during lockdown over the last few weeks, in fact. We just had one online session with that academy so far, but that's very much going to become a real thing, of course, once things return to normal as well. I'll be going up to Hull as regularly as I'm doing the other academies as well. And then, of course, the South East Academy, which is going to launch in September of 2021.
Well, Dan, your life in jazz has been, you've been involved in it since you were young, but it's a very fascinating story. And I was moved, all of us were moved when you told us when you came to Deal a while ago. Would you like to just relate that story about how you took up the trombone?
Sure. So when I was about, I think it was probably year 3 or whenever you begin middle school, my local music service had a service where they basically give you an instrument or loan you an instrument. I was lucky because I chose the trombone and it was free because they called it an endangered instrument. And my parents sort of loved the idea of that because I got a free Yamaha trombone, probably for about 3 or 4 years. And I started going down to NYJO just had a flyer, and it wasn't too far from where I grew up. It was when NYJO London was founded. I was there. I was at the first rehearsal, I think.
Oh.
And it was great, really. And people in NYJO 1 at the time, I used to go and watch them. It was a great environment. Sort of where I spent my Saturday, the full day. But it was great for quite a long time. I'm now 19, and I still do NYJO. And I was probably 8 or 9 when I first went. So I've been there for 10 years with a short break in the middle.
And actually, Dan, I found some promo photos from the very first NYJO London rehearsal.
What was I there?
So I might you were there, and it, clearly your awkward teenage phase. So,
I don't think I was a teenager yet, so I might be able to have an excuse.
You looked smaller than the trombone, so it's nice to see how you've grown up with NYJO.
That's amazing. 8 or 9 when you started with NYJO, Dan. Is that common? Do you usually get kids that young along to the London Academy?
No, but my brother's a classical flautist, and he also played a bit of jazz saxophone, and he sort of went off to Purcell when he was quite young. So I sort of had like someone to look up to who was doing quite well in music, which I guess I'm quite lucky for. So I sort of knew that you had to do the practice, and I was really lucky that Mark Horton, who's now left the country, but he used to run NYJO London, was great for me, and he happened to play the trombone. So he was showing me sort of really helpful stuff. And they used to have members from the main band come down. So Calamau, I don't know if anyone would know of him, but I still see him to this day. He employs me quite a lot now, so I'm quite lucky, really. But he used to show me loads of stuff on trombone and basically give me lessons for free, which is just a really great thing to happen.
And that's one of the main things we try and do at NYJO, because now Dan is in the jazz orchestra itself. He's going to work with the younger musicians. It's that kind of circle of kind of being inspired and then inspiring. So whenever we send Joe out and about the country, we always send some of our NYJO ambassadors like Jazz and Dan with him to spread the message from someone who's a few years older than the participants.
I mean, in a way, we are redesigning, aren't we, music education in Great Britain. For all the reasons that we know, which we don't need to get into, but we are having to do that. There are advantages to that because of people like yourself, Dan and Jazz, because you are inspiring in the fact that you are so good at doing what you do and relating with your younger contemporaries, and also being role models as well, which I'm sure you are. But one question I've got, because you mentioned that your brother is a flautist. Do you both, Jazz and Dan, do you come from artistic families?
No, not really. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go? You can go first.
No, it's cool. We're on the same page there.
No, not really. My dad used to play up until the age of about 18, but he's an engineer. So no, not really. But like I said, my brother sort of led the path for me to be music. So I just had to copy what he did, sort of 3 years behind him, which was quite good.
I see. And Jazz, what about you?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, everyone in my family really appreciates music, and I grew up kind of listening to music. That's for sure. Not really jazz, more like pop rock. You know, I don't know, Madness and Elvis Presley, things like my dad was into and stuff like that. But yeah, I just got fortunate enough to have a school that was kind of into music education and giving opportunity for students to learn. I think it's a choice between, like, at that time, piano, drums, and guitar. You know, it's something, you know, it got everybody interested in. It's kind of that loophole into something more, you know. My phone went flying there.
It's a roller coaster ride with you tonight, Jazz. That's
It's a mad night. Yeah.
Okay.
You see, I find that very heartening that neither of you had particularly musical parents, actually. I think, I mean, it's quite easy to think, I mean, it certainly is the case with the one-to-one tuition I do. It tends to be the kids who persevere with music for longer, with private instrumental tuition, are those who have musical parents or musical families who are encouraged to do it at home. But it's really heartening to know that although there wasn't a history of musicians in your family, that you still got the bug, you still developed that passion just through your own kind of ventures, and look to seek more of that music for yourselves. That's really heartening to hear, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a really lovely thing that you had schools that encouraged it. But I always think that probably the school down the road that you could have gone to might not have had the same attitude. So it is there must be so many kids out there that haven't had that encouragement that you two have had. And try and spread the word as much as we can about music education.
Yeah, 100%.
Clearly done wonders for you two.
Yeah, I think teachers play the biggest role really in it, and I think if you go to somewhere like NYJO, they're not going to have a bad teacher running a thing. Well, and for me, I remember all my teachers when I was that age, and they were brilliant. So I think that's probably the biggest role in people sticking with music.
Clearly, yes, very true. But also for you both in the jazz world, and I'm sure this for Joe as well, the fact that you have been obviously studying at Berkeley in Boston, the fact that you've been part of NYJO, and you've been part of this extraordinary group of young people who are super talented. You are super talented in what you do, and brilliant communicators in every possible way. But there's a whole networking advantage to being part of that world. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Dan?
So I didn't want to jump in and ruin it again.
Yeah. I was holding back too.
That's fine. You go first, Dan.
So I think, networking is the most important. Well, aside from practice, I'd say networking is the second most important thing you could really do. A NYJO is, again, I'm not just saying this because it's a NYJO sort of an organised thing. It's the best place. I mean, so this week on Monday, I was recording for Jamie Cullum, and I got that work through someone I met in NYJO. And then I was doing the Ronnie Scott's Big Band 2 days ago. Again, got that work through someone in NYJO. And these aren't people I particularly spoke to much when I was there. I sort of met them, and people remember things that you wouldn't think they'd remember. And if you're nice, I think people really care about that sort of stuff. And being in a place surrounded by, how many people are in NYJO? Around 28 or so, I don't know, 20 something. You're not. There's 20 people that are potentially going to help you in your career, whether it's in 10 years or next week.
Yeah. Yes. And what about you, Jazz?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think a lot of people maybe are nervous of the word networking. It kind of makes it seem really intense, especially in the music world. It's like, then you have to always be on your A game. You have to always be 100%. What if you're having a bad day, or what if you don't feel, but I think at the end of the day, like what Dan is saying, NYJO, it's a hang, it's like meeting people who are your friends, and, maybe some people you're closer to, and some people you just, play together and don't hang out, but overall, it's just about like getting to know so many different people around there from all over the country, or the world too, and just forming kind of like musical bonds or social bonds, and stuff with people, and then you never know in 10 years time, you know, you might not see them for years, and then you'll come across them on a gig, or you get called for the same opportunity, and you have that bond from years ago. Yeah.
Well, I think the social bonds are as important as the musical bonds, because you are like-minded people, and because you're like-minded, you are rare. You know, there's not so many of you that are passionate about jazz, not in this world, and the fact that you naturally will click. Claire, your role, obviously, in all of this networking, you're very aware of this, I am sure.
Absolutely. I mean, as well as people coming to a NYJO Regional Academy to learn about music and improve on their instrument, it's about meeting people in your area that are into the same things as you and forming friendships. That's as important, because I don't know, for me, when I was playing saxophone, I didn't do it just to be good at the saxophone. I did it because it was really fun to play in a group with other people and have that kind of shared experience and perform together. And that's, you know, whether the young people we work with are going to be professional musicians or not, that experience stays with you, and I think makes you a better person, but I may be biased on that.
No, we do know there is very hard evidence that proves that being a musician makes you a better person, and also a more intelligent person, if I might add. Not wishing to malign anybody who doesn't do music, but there are reasons for that. Joe, we have a history of jazz, a great history of jazz in Kent, with the Kent Youth Jazz Orchestra, of which you remember, and now with the Jazz Journey and whatever we're doing. And this is a wonderful, I mean, it's a very proud moment for us in Deal to become home for the NYJO Academy South East, an incredibly proud moment. Would you like to just give us some of the sort of things, you're going to be sort of literally leading this academy. Would you like to give us some ideas as to what you've got in mind and the sorts of plans?
Yes, well, I mean, I'm quite ambitious about the academy, the South East Academy. I'm from doing the Creative Jazz Weekend and the enormous numbers of participants we've been able to attract to that. It's very kind of encouraging. There's clearly a demand for jazz education, for music making generally, I think, in that part of the country. So I think I can tentatively afford to be quite ambitious about the scale in which we might be able to work ultimately. Obviously, things might take a little while to pick up. But eventually, I have this vision of it being quite a kind of multifaceted kind of institution, really, with lots of different kinds of music education on offer. At the heart of it will be what is at the heart of the other academies, which is learning how to play small group jazz, specifically how to improvise. And I'll be bringing along different kind of arrangements, some jazz standards, not necessarily jazz standards from the Great American Songbook, some more modern jazz compositions, some that are kind of more kind of fusion jazz compositions that are fused with other genres of music, all sorts of things, and kind of working in a kind of repertoire-based way. So looking at a piece of music, understanding how to interpret that piece of music, yes, chiefly how to improvise over that piece of music. And then alongside that, I also imagine kind of clinics or master classes in things like ear training and harmony, understanding a certain amount of theory, not a huge amount of written theory, but understanding how jazz works, how it's constructed, how the players do what they do and why they do it, what certain sound they might want to achieve and how they might go about achieving that particular sound, and listening constantly as well. So one of the things, although the academies are all different by virtue of the fact that they've got different personnel, and the different individuals, of course, collectively make a different kind of group dynamic in every academy. So it's difficult to plan in an entire sense, because of course we don't know who the individuals are going to be and how that group identity will form. But certainly at the heart of all of the work I do, not just for the NYJO academies, but my one-to-one teaching and the various other kind of ensemble coaching and creative education work I do, is listening. So listening to existing music, learning how to appreciate it, or discussing why we might not appreciate it or why we do appreciate it together, and then learning how to interpret it ourselves. That will be at the heart of everything we do, I suspect. But then ultimately, thinking slightly more ambitiously, I would love eventually for there to be, in the way that there is with the London NYJO Academy, a kind of flagship orchestra, a jazz orchestra, playing actual arrangements that all attendees of the academy can eventually aspire to be involved with.
Well, there's every reason that can happen. Jazz, I know you've got to go very soon. And obviously you've been through the Jazz Academy and the NYJO. Have you got anything as a person in your 20s, early 20s, that you would give
not for long.
tips, not for long at all, any top tips that you would give to young people that might be interested in joining a jazz academy, might be a bit frightened, you know, this is NYJO, this is a big fish, you know. Any top tips for them and any advice?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. There's so much advice and kind of stuff to give out there. But at the end of the day, doing NYJO has been a lot of fun, and making friends and playing good music, and hangs outside of NYJO, and, you know, like Dan's saying, all the other opportunities that you get out of it. I have one really good advice that I got when I was in college from Terry Lynn Carrington, who's one of the greatest female jazz drummers ever. And then I played in front of her, was really nervous, obviously really wanting to impress. And after the gig, I got to speak to her and say, you know, do you have any tips or advice? And she said, oh, well, if you're smiling and enjoying yourself like that, you're going to be all right. You know. And from that moment, I was like, that's what it's about. You know, just enjoy yourself. And you know, it can be difficult, and you got to work hard, and you got to do your thing, you know. But at the end of the day, you're supposed to have fun, and don't be afraid, you know. Put yourself out there and get involved in NYJO, and learn and hang and make friends and play good music. That's what it's all about.
and so you would say, don't worry about your particular standard at that moment. Just enjoy it and just go for it, and see where it leads you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I every day I want to improve. I want to practice. I want to get better. You know, I always feel like I want to be better. Yeah, you're just going to learn as you go along.
Do you agree, guys, that we all play at our best when we're enjoying ourselves? When
Exactly.
we're comfortable with the environment we're in, we're comfortable with the other musicians we're playing with, we're comfortable with the way we're sounding personally as a musician at that particular time. But if there's any kind of anxieties there, or any kind of distraction from the pleasure of playing, it can interfere with the quality of the music that's produced.
Yeah, yeah. That's what that famous quote, you know, is with jazz music, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You know,
Yes.
Pace yourself, learn as you go along.
Okay. Well, we're getting quite a number of questions coming in, so I'm going to open this up, I think, now. One question we've got is slightly along those lines. Do you have to be a certain grade to join the NYJO Academy South East? Claire?
Absolutely not. You know, we're not, NYJO isn't about teaching you how to play your instrument, rather how to play in an ensemble and learn to improvise. So if you want to come along, if you can have some facility on your instrument, play a couple of octaves, or understand to play a basic swing groove or something on the drums, but knowing whether that's grade 4 or grade 5 doesn't really matter, because we're going to be creating music together and improving together. And the beautiful thing about jazz and the workshops that Joe leads is that everyone can join in at their different levels together, and be improving at the same time.
That is one of the unique things in jazz, isn't it? Because you can participate in music making, and even if you're a soloist or your lip is slightly tiring, you don't have to go for the high note, do you? You can. No. You can pace yourself, you know, accordingly. Dan, when you were a member of the NYJO Academy, was it quite a mixed ability range that you had in that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think another thing is that you can also go and just watch. I think some of my most fun times I had at NYJO was sitting in and watching the main band rehearse after I'd done rehearsing, and that is as useful as playing, in my opinion, because you get to see how it's meant to be done, and you need something to aim for, I think, no matter what you're doing.
And you also improve by playing with people who are better than you. You know, definitely. It's always the best way to keep yourself improving is by playing with people who are a bit more experienced than you are.
Yes, and one question specifically, because you started when you were 8. How good a trombonist were you when you started in the NYJO Academy?
I don't know, really. I can't remember, but I didn't have too much of a hard time with embouchure sort of stuff. I always sort of naturally picked that up.
You do make it sound easy, yes.
I've never had to do any sort of, some of the stuff I've heard people do about changing embouchures and anything like that. I've always sort of picked it up and it stayed the same. But jazz-wise, I mean, I didn't know anything. And you can just go in there, and I think, I'm assuming it's still run just like this. I think even if you know all the modes of all the scales, or you don't know any songs, you don't know what to play, you're going to have fun, and you're going to hopefully learn something. I think the barrier to entry is really wide, and you can get a lot out of it.
Okay. Second question I've got is, how often will the Academy meet? Joe?
I think we're hoping that this one will be monthly, actually. I mean, it varies from academy to academy in NYJO terms. So the Lancashire and Cumbria one is twice every term, I believe. But this one is hoping to be more regular than that. So yeah, monthly meetups, probably a whole day session at a weekend, I suspect.
Okay. Jazz, I've got a question for you, because we're going to have to say goodbye to you in literally 1 minute. And before we go next door to your rehearsal for your performance tonight, we can watch this, can't we, live tonight?
Yes, please do.
How can we do this?
So the band, or the Instagram page, or the Facebook page, or the YouTube page is called Kansas Smitties. And if you tune in to their 8 p.m, yeah, there will be a video available to watch it live.
So we will be watching you live at 8 o'clock tonight on YouTube or via Facebook, which is great. Yep. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jazz, and good luck with your concert tonight. Brilliant. We'll certainly be enjoying it. I'm sure others will too.
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers for having me. Good to
see you.
Cheers,
Jazz. Have a great gig.
Yeah. Cheers. I'll see you soon. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Well, that brings us very much appropriately to the next question. Will there be opportunities to play in concerts?
Absolutely. You know, at NYJO, we like to think that being on the bandstand and performing is a learning experience in itself. So there will be performances in Deal, I'm sure, at the Deal Festival. Absolutely. And also all the regional academies get together annually for a weekend. So to meet people like yourselves, but from the other parts of the country, to rehearse and share what you've been doing for a weekend and end in a big concert. Next summer, that will be in Durham as part of Durham's International Brass Festival. And then it will move around the country every year. So you may get to go somewhere glamorous, you may not, but it will be great fun wherever it is.
Well, I've always wanted to go to Durham. I want to see Durham Cathedral, and I've heard so much about it. And also I want to go and see the great Hadrian's Wall. So I think I might be joining you. A question here. For a newcomer to jazz, who would any of the panel recommend listening to as an introduction to jazz masters? Dan.
That's a big question. I mean, I'll start off just by saying Charlie Parker, you know, Louis Armstrong, all of that stuff. But I think more importantly is, if you don't like something, that's fine. Because to this day, there's still stuff that is universally considered a brilliant album, and I just don't like it. And I think I really want to like it, but you know, I think it's okay to not like stuff. And if you don't like old jazz, I mean, I personally really do, but if you don't, then try listen to John Scofield or Fusion or something. I mean, you don't have to like it. I think there will be something you like, I'm sure, if you search, but I think it's really is okay, because it'd be great if I sat here and said, listen to Charlie Parker, but then if you go and listen to it and you hate it, I'll feel bad and stuff like that. So you know, I think just try it all out. But I mean, I don't know what instrument you play, but maybe if you said what instrument, I could try and give you people. But I think if you've got Spotify, Apple Music, I don't know what else there is, anything like that, even YouTube. Sorry, yeah, just YouTube.
Yes.
Find something in. I mean, the recommended videos on YouTube are amazing. I can spend a whole night sort of doing nothing and just clicking on them. And most of them probably aren't that great, but you will find something you like, I think, if you stick to clicking on recommended videos for long enough.
I wish YouTube was around when I was first getting into jazz.
Definitely.
You can just go down that rabbit hole and follow it. And if you like something, keep listening and click on the recommended thing. If you don't, go back a step and take it in another direction. And some of the young people we work with, they seem to have the most eclectic taste or have found the most obscure things that they're really into just through YouTube. Whereas I was, going to the library, seeing what jazz CDs they had, and waiting till the next week to go and get another one. It's completely changed things, and I think for a thing like jazz that's so broad, you just have access to a huge amount of material, and you'll like some of it. You'll find what you like.
Indeed.
By exploring.
I feel a bit bad for not giving a direct answer. Do you
No, I
think
thought that was a really good answer, actually.
Oh, okay.
Would it be useful
if I just listed some great albums? I don't really know. I don't want to feel like I've dodged your answer.
It would be so easy just to list all the great players that we listen to all the time. But it's another thing, and it's a talent, I think, to be able to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is completely new to this music. Because to go and get them to listen to Charlie Parker, it might be a bit jarring, a bit abrasive to their ear immediately. So I think it is often better to start slightly later, actually, in the history of jazz. I tend to introduce young people to kind of hard bop stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's going to sound terrible saying this, and I know it's recorded, but I mean, Charlie Parker is probably my favourite musician of all time, and I think that is unanimously considered one of the correct answers to that question. But bad sound quality can be something that puts you off when you're younger.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
The truth is, there's loads of crackle. You can hear people eating in a restaurant, and the sound quality is not great, and that can put you off, because it takes a while to realise that, oh God, that is the best you can be, because you've got to get over all the other stuff that's going on.
But of course, once you've fallen for the music itself and you start to get hungry for learning more language and all that, you then go back to listen to Charlie Parker and you forgive the crackle because you're listening to the actual lines he's creating and you're transcribing them. But yeah, I'd start a bit later. So yeah, sort of the classic Blue Note era, people like Dexter Gordon, Lee Morgan, Hank Mobley, people like this. And it was interesting that you also said, Dan, that this sort of more sort of fusion route, stuff that is kind of associated with other genres of music as well. I do that with a lot of young people. So people like John Scofield. Exactly.
I think if I did give a specific one, Hand Jive, it's got Eddie Harris, the tenor player, on it, who it's unbelievable. I mean, I probably listen to it monthly, I think. You just always go back to it. It's a brilliant album. And I mean, Pat Metheny's sort of the other side of fusion guitar.
Weather Report.
Yeah. And I think, we could sit here all day probably doing this. I should stop now.
Do you have any favourites?
Me?
Claire.
Well, I was just thinking, when I first was really getting into jazz, it was Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers that got me, because Art Blakey was a drummer who basically had a quintet going and brought in the new young talents to be in it. So it's a great place to start, to just pick a Art Blakey record and then follow each person that was in that group to where they went. So I remember I had Live at Cafe Bohemia, and that had Hank Mobley on it, and it just set me off exploring all the greats, basically, because most of them came through Art Blakey's band at some point.
Indeed. Well, I'm going to put in a good word for Oscar Peterson, because had it not been for Oscar Peterson, I wouldn't be a musician. I mean, I was brought up in a musical family, but Oscar Peterson changed my life. So Oscar Peterson as well.
Night Train is a good album for Oscar Peterson if you want to get started. And if you're feeling more adventurous, there's an album called Live in Chicago, and for my money, that is the best Oscar Peterson playing. It's not very well known, but it's just in a restaurant. The sound quality is good, so you won't deal with crackle, and he just sounds unbelievable.
It is extraordinary. I have just about every Oscar Peterson record there is to have. Okay, another question. Also, jazz sometimes appears quite niche. Is there a way of making it more accessible to a younger audience who may not so readily be exposed to it?
Yeah, I mean, Joe's brilliant at this, in that I've seen him in the course of a workshop teach something from the 70s, something from the 50s, and the kids writing their own music together. And I think that's really important, to, if you can improvise or play an instrument, to get the young people playing the music that they want to play, is, whether you call it jazz or whether you don't, it's creative music making, and it's all part of the same lineage in my book. So that's usually the hook, of seeing how creative they can be and how expressive a young person can be.
Joe, do you want to?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, very much what Claire said, but also this kind of leads on from what we were saying before as well. So listening to the young people or the not so young people, whoever the participants are, listening to them express what they already enjoy listening to, and then being able to associate that with a particular jazz artist, or not necessarily a kind of bona fide jazz artist, some sort of artist that bridges some of these gaps that might need to be bridged for those kind of new listeners to the genre. So yeah, for example, I was working with this, often this happens with guitarists actually, but a young lad who comes along to the Lancashire Academy, wasn't really into jazz particularly, but was into his blues, was into some of his kind of his rock, blues-based rock music and stuff. So as Dan mentioned, immediately I thought, oh, John Scofield, let's try him on this guy, or Pat Metheny. So think of these musicians who are jazz musicians, but are perhaps coming from somewhere else. So there's a sound in their playing, there's a quality to their playing that is already familiar to that person as well. The Esbjörn Svensson trio as well, I often introduce to young people, a Swedish piano trio, sadly not around anymore because Esbjörn Svensson died very young, very tragically. But they were brilliant. They kind of turned the jazz world upside down a little bit by combining it with these other kind of a pop sensibility, I suppose, really, but blues and other genres as well was all in there. And very sort of thrilling performances with light shows and sort of very dramatic band to experience live and in fact on record. So there are these artists out there who can be introduced to people who are new to the music in a way that kind of eases them into the genre, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's so much young, but I've just been noticing most of the people we've been referencing are American, but actually in this country there's a really vibrant scene at the moment of young musicians. There was a program for the first time I remember in a long time of young people playing jazz on TV last week, or playing their own music, and I didn't love all of it, and I don't think anyone did. But you could, there was something in it for everyone, I think is what I'm trying to say, and it's such a creative movement, really, especially in kind of southeast London, and the musicians playing it are, well, babies still. So
yes, and to see, as you said, Claire, to see them doing it as well. I mean, we talked a lot about recorded jazz, but to actually see and witness live jazz, not the easiest thing to do, of course, at this precise moment in time. But there are these things happening, these live streamed events things. Like Jazz, as we speak, is warming up to perform at Kansas Smitty's, which is one of those venues that's got this incredible crop of young musicians making very exciting music. One of the interesting things that's happening at Kansas Smitty's is they're reviving quite an old style of jazz, quite traditional jazz, actually, but putting a kind of modern slant on it. They're fabulous sort of modern players as well. But to watch them actually do it and watch the energy that comes off a live jazz ensemble is a really infectious experience. Obviously, the best way to do so is in the club, like physically in the presence of these people. But the next best thing, I would say, is to see it online, on video, on these live streamed gigs, rather than just relying on the recordings.
And Dan, coming back to something that you said, because there are so many styles of jazz. I mean, we talk about jazz as a specific genre. We talk about classical music. I mean, the range of classical music from the Renaissance right up to contemporary, it is vast, and it's just the same, isn't it, with jazz, going back to the early forms of jazz to the contemporary jazz, and that is a large spectrum that you can either be involved in playing, or you will fit into one particular part or several parts of that. Is that something that you do have particular fondness for?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound like such an evasive, rubbish answer, but I think one of the great things is like, which is a great skill, is learning how to learn the right way, in a way.
Yeah.
So if you are going to, I play quite a lot of classical. I'll do anything, to be honest, but I think if you learn how to do it right and approach it with the right attitude, it might be so different, but there are more similarities than there are differences, I think, no matter what style you're playing. So
Okay,
I don't know.
That neatly brings us on to this next question. It's how do we inspire a love of playing jazz with a real understanding of the rigor behind the theory of the language and structure of improvisation without putting young players off who might not have had that approach? Joe.
By stealth.
That's a tricky one. I would say, I mean, yeah, try and cultivate a love of the music first, I would say, before forcing them into the study room to work on the theoretical side of it.
Okay, another question here. How best can we encourage other music teachers who may not be jazz musicians to encourage and support jazz in the South East? Joe.
Come along to the academy. Come along to the NYJO South East Academy and experience it for yourself. I think it's a fantastic thing when experienced players, teachers, are bold enough to admit that they have less experience in other aspects of music making, and then come along and try to inform themselves, try to educate themselves, and hopefully enjoy themselves in the process. And I think also for the young people, seeing older musicians, experienced musicians in the ensemble, learning this material at a similar rate to what they are, is very inspiring for them too. I think throw yourself into it, get involved, try and learn more about the music by playing it and by being in amongst other people who can play it and know how to impart some of the ways in which you might go about playing it. That would be my advice.
Which brings me to this question. To someone who doesn't have much contact with jazz, could you recommend something to listen to that has inspired you? We've had that one before, but partly. But I think this is a moment for the Desert Island Disc, the one that you would take with you even if the sea came and took everything else away. Let's start off with you, Dan.
I'd probably say Clifford Browne, A Study in Browne.
Clifford Browne, A Study in Browne. Claire.
Well, I've had a bit of practice because I had to do this exact exercise for the NYJO blog the other day. So it's Marcus Strickland's tune Joy Song, because it, if I was stuck on a desert island, would cheer me up no end. And it has kind of done the same through lockdown. There's always something new in that piece. I love it.
Okay. And Joe.
Wow. Very difficult. I was hoping that the answer would come to me while listening to the other two. Very difficult. There's so many. Oh, wow. The Cologne concert, Keith Jarrett.
Okay.
So Keith Jarrett sat down at a piano in Cologne with nothing, a completely blank canvas, and improvised for 2 hours to an audience. Complete outpouring of emotion through improvisation, and it's utterly extraordinary.
That's final. When will the Academy open? This is a really important question. When will the Academy open? It's not something we've actually said. It's going to open in September, isn't it?
September next year. But the aim was actually that from the summer of this year, we'd start doing more and more activity in the area to build up towards it. So certainly once I'm back allowed to Kent, we will be visiting, and we'll be going into schools, and we'll be running some workshops to kind of show what the Regional Academy will be like, and then it'll kick off in earnest next September.
And what is quite remarkable is that actually by September, October, we are being told that things might just about be back to normal.
Touch wood.
Touch wood, which is great news. So it was a brilliantly chosen time. The gods were on our side. That brings us to the end of our questions with a particularly appropriate one. I would like to thank Dan for being the star trombonist he is, and bringing such a joy to Deal only recently. And we're going to be hearing you tomorrow night playing some amazing solos and some wonderful ensemble work when at 4 p.m. our recording from St. George's Church goes live. Thank you very much, Dan. Joe,
thank you.
for all that you do for jazz in the area. and across the land. Fantastic. And we're going to hear you, obviously we're going to hear you, more of you tomorrow throughout the day with your fantastic tutorials. And I would recommend people listen to the tutorials that have been going online throughout today, because whatever level you are at, they will be inspiring. You can listen to them and over again. You can work them out. They're full of, they've been brilliantly edited by Cameron from NYJO, and they contain visual elements as well as the wise words. And Claire, thank you so much for your faith in us in Deal, and for bringing this really, truly remarkable opportunity to our area.
My pleasure. We can't wait to actually get started and kind of get out of the computer screen and
Exactly.
down to Kent.
We can, absolutely. Thank you all very much indeed. And on that note, it's goodbye.